So, Skip, the last movie that you did with Alfonso Cuaron was Gravity, for which you won an Oscar. And to say the least, that was a very ambitious film from a sound perspective. When he told you the plot of his next film, Roma, did you expect a little bit of a breather in terms of what the workload was going to be like? Or did you know going in that it was going to be just as ambitious as the work that you did on the last one?
I mean, I've known Alfonso for a long time, and even Y Tu Mama Tambien, which is my first experience with his um, insane mind, crazy approach to making movies. You just know that there's always going to be um, a deeply emotional uh, main movie
Mhm.
with a lot of other stuff happening in the background. And he, like everyone else on the project, we didn't know going in what was going to happen. And he told me that it was going to be a more personal film that was going to be made in Mexico City. But that's all we knew. So I knew that it would be very different from Gravity, but I also know that knew that it would be similar to Gravity, and that we would have some big sound uh, potential, as well as some really big ideas to try to sort with him. And that's why he's, like I said to him from the very beginning, whatever it is, I'm in. And you don't have to tell me anything else. I'm in. I'm yours.
Well, once the film was, coming together and taking the shape that it has now, what were those initial conversations like about what he wanted in terms of a soundscape for the film?
I think the initial it was a very kind of open process where he wanted us to dig into the project and follow our own instincts to a great degree. I mean, he was looking forward to our input and response to the movie. And but also there was a lot of material where we physically, mechanically were sorting out a lot of stuff. And I don't think he really wanted to restrict the way we approached the work. And he wanted us to instead to try everything, try a lot of things, and work out the details kind of on our own in the preliminary approach. And then we got into a very, very specific regimen where we went through the material in a very methodical way. And once we got our basic outline going, and we did this scene section by section, working through the movie, we would refine and refine before we moved on. We had something that from all the material that we had gathered and from all of our thoughts, we had something that he could embrace. And we had a lot of very specific instructions about what types of things, what types of sounds to have, and where to use them. And there are a lot of things in the movie where sound helps geographically locate where you are, and it helps the kind of the way that people move around within the frame. It helps locate them geographically, which is actually very similar to what we did in Gravity, where we used what little sounds we had in Gravity to help you locate where you were. And then once we got going, the ideas are actually fairly clear in most cases in the movie. And he beyond the detailed instruction about what actual type of car or bird or whatever he wanted to hear because it would be appropriate to the place. The other bigger ideas were, we knew it was quite clear what to do, and then it became an experimental process of how much or how little was required to achieve the best balance of all the components. So he didn't really need to explain it to us that directly, but instead what we did is we presented ideas, and then we just refined and refined, and he would push us to the balance that he wanted to have.
Mm.
And so it was kind of it was an exploration and then a refinement. process.
When you're in that early exploration phase, I mean, what are you looking for, right? I mean, when you're looking at a picture and you're trying to figure out what kind of sounds you're going to put up there, what is that early experimentation process like?
Well, you know what? That's an extension of the previous question, which I didn't really answer correctly, which is um, when you're working on, well, let's say Gravity, for instance, and Roma, and compare them in this way. The in both cases, we were trying to press a certain reality, where it was both in the case of Gravity, there was kind of a scientific question about what you could have, what would be realistic, and that reality is a much kind of more scientific idea. In Roma, the reality is much more about kind of a combination of actuality and the documentary aspect, but also the emotional attachment that we all attach to practically everything, because that's a very important part of Alfonso's association with our process. So I think you have movies have kind of a reality. Like every movie has a built-in reality. It's a combination of the story and the events and the characters and the dialogue, of course, the drama. There is a kind of overall netting around the whole thing, which is the atmosphere, and that kind of becomes the reality. In the case of Gravity, it was the more scientific idea, slightly more esoteric, because none of us know what that is. But in Roma, it's the opposite. It's a completely sensual, much more emotional reality that everybody knows. So you have to have something which is very, very believable, but within that you can also push. You can very, very softly peddle information to the audience, and you can guide them in a way to closer proximity to the events and the actors in the movie. And you can also, we think, we certainly tried to do this idea where we believe that at a certain point, with the help of Atmos and the panning of dialogue and sound effects, and the atmospheres themselves all panned as well when the camera moved, that there's kind of a tipping point where the audience acknowledges subconsciously, I think, that it's real. This is a real thing, and this is a reality which I recognize both emotionally and intellectually. And now I don't have to think about that anymore. I don't have to question, why is that moving? What's happening? It becomes like, okay, now I'm actually in the frame, in the scene, and I'm very, very directly enjoying what's happening. And I'm no longer being distracted, or at least aware of other things that are happening somewhat differently than I'm used to having it presented. And now actually that helps me. I'm no longer standing at the door. I step inside the room, and now I'm standing in the room, and I'm actually 2 feet away from the action instead of standing outside looking in. And I think that it really exists. I think this is like, I wouldn't say scientifically, but it's like a possibility where you can actually help the audience gain a greater degree of access to what's happening in the film, and actually allow them to step in and actually be in the room with the action. Okay, that was the goal. All right, so
Yeah.
I don't know. Beyond that, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does all kind of contribute to this very immersive experience. You know, I mean, you really do feel like you're in that home or you're in that city. I mean, yeah, if you could point, I guess, to like specifics, you know what I mean? Like the ways in which you kind of create the feeling that you're in this city at this time. Is there something you can point to as like an example of, sounds that you use in order to create that kind of experience?
Well, at the very beginning of the film, we have the opportunity, Alfonso creates the opportunity for us to explore the very subtle and very quiet morning from his childhood memory. And what were the sounds, and how do they seep in, and how do they grow and build as the city wakes up around you. And so you have both the kind of documentary aspect where we're trying to get actual sounds that are like the vendors who come down the street. It was a very strong memory of Alfonso's, and it was actually something that we could pretty easily either have recordings of or get recordings of, or recreate them with actors or sound effects. And those actually turn out to be a very strong audio part of the beginning of the day. And being near the airport as he was in that part of the city, the constant and very methodical passage of the planes coming into land, that was something that you can easily blow by that and not hear that anymore. Once you become kind of used to it, you don't even hear it anymore. Or at the beginning of the day, you start to notice it, and you start to notice that it happens every 2.4 minutes or whatever it is, and it starts to become a rhythmical aspect of the atmosphere of where you live. Then there's the other part of it where mechanically we were experimenting, I guess, with the idea where the actors and their lines and their recordings all followed the characters very closely to where they were in the frame. And then when they exited the frame, that would stay attached to them. And so we had their dialogue tracks, and in some cases some ADR. Mostly it was recorded on set. And we had Foley, footsteps, etc., movement sounds for them that followed with that. And so we created like little kind of mini mixes that followed each character around the room wherever they were. And that also, that's a little bit of a push where we're kind of forcing the audience to be included in the actual place. And so we have the kind of broader kind of documentary aspects where we're creating we're recreating an environment. And then we have this kind of more sort of mechanical system where we're directing the audience that things are happening and the sound will be glued to the source of those sounds. So you're kind of helping and pushing the audience at the same time.
Right. Before I let you go, as I mentioned before, you are an Oscar winner for Gravity. It was one of 7 prizes that that film won for you and Alfonso and everybody involved. You've competed before that for your work on Coen Brothers films like No Country for Old Men and True Grit and Inside Llewyn Davis. What has that recognition meant for you in your work?
Oh, well, it's very exciting for sure. I mean, I guess it's kind of acknowledgement and verification that you're having an impact on the process. And I think personally, I was very happy to share with the filmmakers the idea that we can work together and do something that people actually recognize and acknowledge. And that was very, in all cases, getting awards is always to me about the association with the filmmaker. And I like to be able to say to the filmmakers, people are listening, the sound is important, and to be able to say to my filmmakers, thank you very much for giving us the space and the page and the ink to work with to help the sound be part of your movie and help it be part of the storytelling. And beyond that, the awards are, I mean, it's all very exciting and everything, but you certainly don't want to be committed to awards like it's a necessary part of the job. And
Right.
it's very much a very happy kind of coincidental benefit. I try to look at it that way. I mean, it is super exciting for sure, and particularly for your family. It's you go from the obscurity of people have no idea what you're doing to being on television. It's crazy. So.
Indeed. Well, you've got another great movie here. Skip, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
Thank you.